on just about any television show, hunting television show these days, and you see a buck laying there that you think to yourself, and there's absolutely, positively nothing wrong with shooting any legal whitetail out there as long as you do it in a legal and ethical way, and no one was ever going to change my mind on that one, ever. And frankly, I think one of the most disgusting things we do as hunters is we sit there and judge others that we have no clue what their circumstances are. What we're actually talking about is every one of those young bucks. Oh, it's a management buck, it's a management buck, it's a management buck. And I'm telling you, having set up a heck of a lot of these people that are sitting there posing with these deer on the bucks themselves, I can tell you there was nothing management about it. They wanted a dang TV show and they feel that they need to justify it. You shouldn't need to justify a darn thing. You legally and ethically shoot yourself. When does it actually make sense to manage deer? When does it make sense to shoot that 2.5-year-old that's got a little rack like this to improve the standing stock or genetics? Okay, right off the bat, you cannot improve the genetics of your property if it is a free-range property. The reason you can't is this little thing called the yearling buck dispersal. The overwhelming majority of bucks that are 2.5 years or older on your ground, they were not born there. They came from anywhere from 1 to 10 miles away on average. Okay, some come from farther, some come from closer. So unless you own at least 640 acres, and it won't happen much then, now, realistically, unless you own 5,000 plus acres, the overwhelming majority of the deer that you are hunting at 2.5 years or older, they weren't from your property. And the overwhelming majority of bucks that end up siring those does on that ground, guess where those 1.5-year-old bucks are gonna go? 1 to 10 miles away. You are literally, there's been study after study after study, you are doing no good when it comes to genetics. So why in the world would anyone ever consider managing a property for whitetails? Well, you don't manage genetics. What you do is, for a very, very small portion of the audience, it makes sense for them to manage the standing stock of whitetails on that ground, because we cannot stockpile bucks. Any property can only hold X number of mature bucks, period. Now, we can go ahead and divide the property up, make it so each area has everything a buck could want, the best food, water, feeling of comfort, security, breeding opportunities in each one of these areas on that 240-acre piece of ground. Make it 4 or 5 rather than 1. That helps. But even then, there's a cap. We cannot stockpile bucks from year to year to year because of what I'm going to refer to as osmosis effect. Now, osmosis actually happens to do with gases moving from higher concentration to lower concentration, but it's the same premise, only on whitetails. Social stress is real. We don't talk about it, but it is very real within the whitetail community, and they butt heads. So if you have gotten your property to the point where every single year a percentage of your stud up and coming 3.5-year-olds are going off to the neighbors because they can dominate over there, they can't dominate over here with these 4 and 5.5-year-old bucks, then it makes sense. If you have 5 3.5-year-old animals and you believe you're only going to be able to hold 3 of them as 4.5s, well, if 2 of them have really, really small runty racks and the other 3 have really good racks, it's not a bad idea to shoot those 2 with the inferior racks. No, you aren't helping genetics, but guess what? That one with the smaller rack, he probably ain't gonna blow up and add 40 inches next year. Those ones with the bigger racks, though, they just might at the same age. You have to wait until 3.5, though, before you can even pretend to make any decisions like that, because way too much of what that 1.5 and 2.5-year-old has on its head has everything to do with when it was born. If it was a late-born buck fawn, it's going to have a smaller than average 2.5, 1.5 and 2.5-year-old rack, but it catches up at 3.5. if it was born particularly early to a really healthy mother on a healthy range, it's going to have a disproportionately larger rack as a 1.5 and 2.5 than it otherwise would, and it settles back down at 3.5 to the average. Even then, you're playing odds, you're going to be wrong sometime, but that is the one situation when you have too many bucks for your property, you're going to be losing them the next year. Then, to me, it makes sense to take a few management bucks that are 3.5 years old or older. How many of us are in that situation? The majority of us aren't. For the majority of you, forget about this noise and just go have fun. The question on whether managing a property's whitetails makes sense or not, actually first, before you even think about it, realize it's like herding cats. It is not real effective, and you're going to experience all sorts of frustration because these deer don't realize that oh, wait a minute, I shot these other two, so you shouldn't leave. Oh, wait a minute, you left anyway. Dang it. Now, all you're doing is you're shifting the odds, okay? If your ground has too many bucks, then shooting some management deer makes sense. Not for genetics, but for what you will have next year. Remove the garbage, leave the gems. Guess what? You're going to have more gems next year. For most of us, on a 40 and 80, even 160 acres where we're struggling to see a 3.5-year-old buck, yeah, probably doesn't make a lot of sense at all. And that's okay.